Urban Squeeze.
And today on Urban Squeeze, it's Jason Byrne's turn. Tony Matthews last week. Jason back. School of Environment at Griffith University is where he is from. Jason, hello.
Good afternoon, Matt.
Great to have you here. Look, I think the best way, we've had some fabulous callers on this already talking about telecommuting, essentially working from home and flexible workplace practices and the like. But there was an incident that went viral online recently that probably is a nice place to start with this discussion. It involves an expert, Professor Robert Kelly, an expert in the ins and outs of what's going on around the Korean Peninsula, and this is what happened to him.
And what will it mean for the wider region? I think one of your children has just walked in. I mean, shifting sands in the region. Do you think relations with the North may change?
I would be surprised if they do. Pardon me.
That's right.
My apologies.
What's this going to mean for the region?
My apologies. South Korea's policy choices on North Korea have been severely limited.
I've dwelt on this before. I love the fact that he's an expert. He's going, is it North or South? I don't know. Just basically depicting every family everywhere trying to do things a little more flexibly.
Right, his mind completely blown by what's going on in the background. My favourite bit is when all the books that he had so carefully curated to be in video, right? All his publications and stuff, all swept off the table on the floor. Right.
Gone. Anyway, the plight of Robert Kelly is one that obviously plenty of people can relate to. Working from home, we've had some calls, as I mentioned. 3 female callers, all of whom had been doing the telecommuting thing for a long time, which I suppose caught me a little bit by surprise because you think of it as a more contemporary phenomenon, you know, the need to be more flexible and the availability of technology to make us more flexible around workplaces. Let's begin at the beginning though, Jason. What is a broad definition of telecommuting and how's it changed things?
Right, good place to begin. I like the way that you introduced this, Matt, with the idea that it's been around for a long time. So people have been talking about this since at least the 1950s, believe it or not. Really, it started to become entertained in a wider sense in the 1970s with the oil crisis that affected many cities around the world. People not having access to fuel, not being able to be in their cars, couldn't get to work. The obvious thing is, can you somehow work from home or work flexibly? What would that look like?
Wow, okay.
I remember being in second year university and reading a piece by Aaron Kellerman on the future of the city, and they were forecasting all of these super radical changes as we were able to work flexibly, work from home, work in regional call centres or regional centres where you might come together in a little hub. You might have shared spaces or shared facilities or shared offices, maybe telework kind of centres. So these are all definitions of telecommuting or telework. And the forecast then was that it was going to be the death of the city and that we'd all be living in these kind of remote places, on a mountaintop with a beautiful view or on the beach or whatever.
Just zenning it up somewhere.
Commuting in. And your reality that your callers have talked about today and most people's reality, including the one that we just played, is radically different to that, right? It's about juggling the kind of work-life balance. It's about constant interruptions, about technology not working properly, things freezing up, links going down, that sort of stuff.
It's more about making work fit with life than life with work, if that sort of makes sense. It
is.
Yeah.
So the idea here is around flexibility and can you commute electronically to your place of employment, whatever that may mean. And so we've got new information communication technology kind of breakthroughs, like Skype is one that we all take for granted. Zoom is another kind of platform there.
Professor Robert Kelly was demonstrating for us in that little bit of audio.
Our mobile phones now, our smartphones have more computer processing power than what they had when they went to the moon and the latest, technology at the time. So this is all showing how things are changing. And indeed, you can almost work from your phone now, plug in a little keyboard and it's a virtual computer right there.
Good Lord help your eyes, though, if that is in fact the case. What sort of issues are being considered in terms of the way we plan our cities in and around the idea of flexibility in a workplace?
So I guess there's some benefits, and then there's some problems around this kind of form of work. First, maybe it would be useful to put some figures on it. So just how many people are we talking about as well, right? So the estimates in the US is that 10 to 16% of the workforce are telecommuting in some form, flexible work, 1 day a week from home, or sometimes from home, sometimes from a regional centre, hot desking, this kind of stuff.
10 to 16%. 10 to
16%. Some rough numbers have been put on it in the literature that I was reading, like up to 16 million people. In Australia, it's kind of comparable. So estimates are anywhere from, say, 5 to 15%, depending on your definition and depending on the kind of work. The benefits, so obviously less time sitting on things like the M1 if you have to commute to a major centre.
It's so relevant to us here on the Gold Coast, this discussion.
And it's really relevant to Melbourne and Sydney as well, where housing prices are going through the roof. As people are gravitating to those cities attracted to employment, some people now, and I've been reading recently, live on Byron Bay and then maybe go to work in Melbourne or Sydney 2 or 3 days a week and telecommute the rest of the time. I've got colleagues who are doing that as well, who are working in Sydney and living on the Gold Coast.
In academia?
In academia.
Right.
Increasingly in the kind of environments I work in, it's about teleconferencing. So some of my colleagues are mums. They're on the soccer field while their kids playing soccer, and we're having a conference call real time, solving issues, that sort of stuff. So these are some of the benefits. Lower expenses for employers because they don't have to provide so much office space. Potentially the ability to, like the example you played, hang out with your children, although maybe not so good in some cases.
Live TV cross.
Right. But it's not suitable necessarily for every kind of job, right? So we can't really imagine tradies becoming teleworkers, right?
No.
We are, however, seeing an increasing change, and these are really disruptive changes that will affect cities in a major way. We've talked about some of these in urban squares before, like, for example, driverless cars. So you could see a space where you might be in a driverless car, commuting somewhere, working at the same time, teleworking from that space.
Not me, I'd be too terrified the whole way.
Well, and driverless planes, that stuff is just around the corner. I saw a new video this week with kind of Uber of aircraft, but we'll leave that for another episode.
Another discussion.
Right. So then there's also some benefits in terms of potentially that flexibility with employers being able to choose a range of highly qualified people from around the world and hook them up together and do things. General Motors has closed down production of its Holden plant, but it's kept the design centre in Australia, for example. And so those designers are telecommuting, in effect, to the US and doing designs and sending them off, that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
The disadvantages, we may as well look at a few of those as well. Work-life balance, obviously. We just looked at the classic example.
Yes.
It's easy to get hung up in a work environment where you may work longer hours than what we expect. Many of us are already working longer hours than what we expected we would. Job satisfaction can be affected. I'm a bit of an introvert, so I quite like hanging out at home and getting some stuff done and being away from telephone calls and emails and
the clutter,
The clutter. But the price is that you miss out on those face-to-face interactions. There have been some studies that suggest that some people feel like they're missing out on opportunities because they're not around, they're not seen.
Yes.
And even Yahoo, there was a big kind of a kerfuffle a couple of years ago where Yahoo decided they weren't going to allow telecommuting anymore in their Australian office, and they were requiring people to be on site all the time. That caused all kinds of dramas.
Yes. Fascinating that a tech company essentially is bucking the trend. Yeah.
So workplace inclusion is a bit of an issue. Job satisfaction, it can be an isolating environment. I'm missing out on some of those face-to-face interactions, and something we might pick up in a couple of weeks' time on Urban Squeeze, this idea of potentially anxiety and depression creeping in as you're kind of confined to an environment that you may not necessarily have control over.
Yeah. So there's a fair bit to think about here. I can't help but unpack the whole idea of it in the context of the Gold Coast as a satellite of Brisbane. So many people making that trip up and back. One of the callers mentioned before, 15 hours a week, give or take, if you have a full-time job out of Brizzy. A lot of people doing that, making that trip. It would seem that the opportunity is rife for people to work either some of the time or all of the time on this basis, relying on technology and taking advantage of this part of the world to work in another part of the world.
Yeah.
Are we equipped to be able to manage that effectively here in the city?
Another excellent question. So I did some number crunching and
Yeah.
checked out some data, that kind of stuff. Apparently, there's about 200,000 people a day from Sunshine Coast, Gold Coast, and other regional centres who are commuting into Brisbane.
Charging into
a lot
Brizzy.
of people,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So you can imagine if they weren't on the freeway, that's less pollution, less carbon emissions. There's less obesity from sitting in your car all the time and not exercising. Lower levels of stress with road rage, all that kind of stuff, right?
Less infrastructure spend on
less
widening
infrastructure
roads. Yep.
spent on doing silly things like putting extra lanes on roads which just get congested anyway. We know that from planning. So I did some quick number crunching. 97% of businesses in Queensland are small businesses, and they employ roughly 43% of the private sector workforce.
97% are small businesses.
Small businesses. It's quite amazing.
Yeah.
In the Gold Coast, about 32,000 people, or 14% of residents, travelled outside of the area to work, according to the 2011 data. 70% live and work in the city, which is quite amazing. I didn't expect it to be that high, but only 18% in the same areas where they live. So there's even a lot of commuting going on within the broader Gold Coast area.
Yeah, right.
Again, contributing to congestion. You only have to be around Bundle to see that in the morning, right?
Again, we talk about the shape of the Gold Coast as a city, this long, thin, linear strip that has its own challenges from a traffic perspective.
And the main method of travel, according to the Australian Bureau of Statistics, again, won't surprise you, 66% car dependent. That's drivers. You add another 10% passengers, so it's well over 70% car dependent. People working from home, about 5%, approaching 6%. People on the bus or train, under 2%, walking under 3%. So again, you can see some benefits here. If we could get people off roads, less congestion, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
But not everybody can do it. So in this workforce breakdown, about 17% of people working on the Gold Coast are professionals, about 15% trades workers, 12% in sales, 12% managers, about 15% clerical. So, obviously tradies can't do it. Health professionals, well, nurses can't really telework, right? They need to be there in a room next to people. Same with aged care. Doctors, however, this may change as the technology gets there with being able to operate remotely. So it's in the very near future, it's quite possible you could have an expert surgeon in the US operating on you here on the Gold Coast, right?
Spare my days. Yeah, amazing.
So that kind of stuff is a possibility. The challenges for planning, which you hinted at in your last question, were around how does the planning system cope with this? So benefits in reducing congestion, but how do we provide for flexible workspaces? The Gold Coast Town Planning Scheme allows you to work from home, but it says you may only have one other person, not yourself, who's part of that workforce in your home. You may only have one delivery a day to your home from outside.
These are rules.
These are rules in the Town Planning Scheme.
Town Planning Scheme, wow, okay.
And that's going to present some challenges if you're running a small business and you've got maybe multiple deliveries. Increasingly, we're getting deliveries to our houses for all kinds of things. And it would also present some challenges for car parking, for potentially disrupting the neighbourhood with congestion or noise or maybe even sound or light, given the kind of activities that might be going on.
Whatever you're doing, yeah.
Yeah, so there's some potential issues around that. The biggest one is around the infrastructure for ICT, for commuting and communications and computing, that kind of stuff. So the NBN, I hate to bring that up, but the NBN is not necessarily performing to everyone's expectations. It's not necessarily delivering the kind of bandwidth we were hoping for. It didn't land up being completely fibre optic cabled, this kind of stuff. And it may set us back a little bit in terms of the kinds of things we can do. That's a downside. On the other side, we may leapfrog that technology very soon anyway and be doing a lot of stuff by wireless. Increasingly, there are suggestions that we may have these kinds of separate hubs that exist outside that infrastructure.
Yeah, wow. Fascinating insight. A city of the future here on the Gold Coast. I wonder how many of us will be working from home. You can't calculate those figures yet, can you? I mean, broadcasting from home, but I'll try to sort of personalise the experience. Broadcasting from home, technically possible.
Technically possible.
Technically possible. Is there a will? No, probably not.
Because we're at the heart of it, we're a gregarious species, right? So let's go back to the beginning where we started here with this discussion. When Aaron Kellerman was writing about this in the late 1980s and forecasting the death of the city, he would have been amazed to see the opposite occur. Our cities have grown even more. We've got this kind of spatial concentration of activity in our central business districts. We've now got mixed-use development with hotels and housing and hospitals and schools and residences possible in the same building, right, let alone in the same space.
Yeah.
And because we're gregarious and we like these face-to-face interactions, we want to hang out with each other. We want to be at restaurants and cafes, this kind of stuff, right? So I think telecommuting will have its role. It will certainly help us combat some of these issues we've talked about with congestion and pollution and this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, there's going to be a lot of people still wanting to hang out face-to-face.
Yeah, face-to-face. Well, I wonder if there's a generational thing attached there. I'll steal away Jason Byrne from the Griffith University School of Environment on Urban Squeeze this week with me, Matt Webber, just for a few more moments, because one caller, I think it was Jackie from Burleigh Waters earlier on, I put that very question to her, Jason. Is the idea of face-to-face contact overvalued in this modern era? Are people now well equipped enough to get a gauge, get a handle on each other's behaviours by phone, by text, by email, and all these things? How, Skype, you've mentioned too.
What did she say?
She said, no, she still values face-to-face contact in the course of her work. It's important to her, but she did use the word her generation, or use that term, her generation. Now, that might be what you and I are used to and what we prefer. We like to eyeball people, but you do wonder if, your millennials and whatnot coming through and the generations that will follow them, Gen Z thereafter, I wonder what their relationship with this kind of flexibility will be like. Are they as social creatures as us, or are they happy to let technology...
So maybe my workplace is an excellent place to answer that question.
Yeah.
We have the ability not just to telework, but to telelearn, distance learning, distance education.
Excellent example,
When we started to record our lectures and have these available through lecture capture and put up online, we found a quick drop-off in attendance in our classes, a rapid drop-off. If you can access the lecture online, why would you bother going through all the hassle of trying to find parking and the expense of parking?
Yeah.
And commuting, congestion, all that kind of stuff, right?
Oh, you can watch it in your own time.
You can watch it in your own time, whenever you want.
Yeah.
But we found a couple of interesting things. First, student success started to drop away because people are not terribly disciplined, right? That's why we have co-share, co-working spaces for passive monitoring, that kind of stuff, supervision. The second thing is that they were missing out on really important teamwork components, and innovation often comes not in isolation from people, pondering up on the mountain. It comes from working together.
From whiteboarding.
Shooting the breeze and whiteboarding and exchanging ideas. And that's why cafes are so popular for this kind of exchange, right?
Yeah.
So when we put in some very subtle kinds of incentives to be there, for example, pop quizzes that might happen randomly during the class time, that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
People were present. But the stuff that worked better was actually changing the kind of teaching environment we had, where we flip the classroom. They go and do some reading outside. Everybody comes back into a studio space like we have in planning, and we collaborate on problem solving. And employers are actually telling us these are the skills they value the most in millennials and the generation that's going to come after, is this ability to work as a team, to problem solve, to innovate,
collaborate,
to apply a diverse set of skills to coming up with things that we can't even envisage at the moment, right, that are just over the radar, but we can't know what they're like. And so if we start to build up these skills, which can only happen face-to-face, then paradoxically they're better prepared for work.
Isn't it interesting? We're not quite ready to shuck the face-to-face elements of life yet. Jace, always a good chat. Thank you.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you, Matt.
Jason Byrne from the Griffith School of Environment, Urban Squeeze for another week.